What if I told you the world is changing right now and you didn't even notice? Your payments clear, your packages arrive on time. The headlines talk about politics and celebrities. But beneath that calm surface, the foundations of global power are quietly rearranging themselves, transaction by transaction, payment by payment, data flow by data flow. This isn't speculation, it's already happening, and in this video I'll show you the 3 silent shifts already redrawing the map of power, starting with the one that affects your wallet every single day. First, the payment infrastructure shift. For 70 years after World War II, global trade ran through a single set of rails: SWIFT for messaging, dollar clearing through New York, correspondent banking anchored in London. That system gave America extraordinary leverage: freeze a nation's banks with a keystroke, block its oil sales overnight. This power felt permanent. But permanence is an illusion. Nations learned. After 2014, Russia built SPFS, a domestic alternative to SWIFT. China accelerated its cross-border interbank payment system. The UAE and India launched local currency trade. Brazil and Argentina discussed a common currency. None threaten dollar dominance today, but together they create optionality, the ability to keep trading when Western rails close. And optionality changes everything. When nations know they have an exit ramp, they negotiate differently. They take risks they wouldn't otherwise take. The shift isn't in headlines. It's in the quiet diversification happening right now in corporate treasuries worldwide. A German manufacturer selling to Vietnam might accept yuan through CIPS to avoid dollar fees and US oversight. A Saudi oil company selling to China increasingly accepts yuan directly, settled through Shanghai's oil futures market. These decisions seem minor alone. Cumulatively, they reroute global commerce away from Western choke points. Over 20% of global trade now settles in currencies other than the dollar. Double what it was 15 years ago. Not a revolution, an evolution. But evolution compounds. And here's what most people miss. This shift isn't about replacing the dollar. It's about making the dollar optional. And optionality is the first step toward irrelevance. This brings us to the second silent shift: supply chain reconfiguration. After decades of hyper-globalization, making everything wherever it's cheapest, we're entering an era of strategic fragmentation. Not de-globalization, fragmentation. Companies aren't bringing all production home. They're building parallel supply chains, one serving Western markets through Mexico and Eastern Europe, another serving Asian markets through Vietnam and India. Apple now manufactures iPhones for America primarily in India, not China. Tesla builds cars for Europe in Berlin, not Shanghai. TSMC is building duplicate chip fabs in Arizona while maintaining Asian facilities. This isn't ideology, it's insurance. Insurance against tariffs, against shipping chaos, against geopolitical rupture. Over 40% of global trade now flows within regional blocks rather than across them, a quiet reversal of the globalization trend that defined the late 20th century. This matters because supply chains aren't just economic, they're political. When your pharmaceuticals come from one region and your electronics from another, your foreign policy tilts toward whoever keeps those flows moving. When America depends on Asian fabs for advanced chips, it must weigh military posturing against Taiwan against supply disruption risk. Power isn't shifting through conquest, it's shifting through dependency, quietly, transaction by transaction, as companies rewire the world's economic nervous system. And this rewiring creates new centers of influence. Vietnam isn't a military superpower, but as it becomes the assembly hub for everything from sneakers to semiconductors serving Western markets, its diplomatic weight grows overnight. Mexico isn't challenging America militarily, but as nearshoring accelerates and factories relocate from China to Mexican border towns, Mexico gains leverage it never possessed before. Power follows production, and production is quietly relocating while nobody watches the headlines. This brings us to the third and most invisible shift: data sovereignty. Data has replaced oil as the world's most valuable resource, and nations are realizing whoever controls data flows controls the future of AI, finance, and security. Europe passed GDPR not just for privacy, but to assert sovereignty over citizen data flowing to American tech giants. China built the Great Firewall and required data localization, not merely for censorship, but to ensure its AI development isn't dependent on foreign servers. India now mandates payment data stay within borders. Brazil requires health records stored locally. Indonesia demands social media companies maintain domestic servers. This isn't just regulation, it's sovereignty reassertion in the digital age. When data can't freely cross borders, innovation clusters form around regulatory zones. Capital follows those clusters. Talent follows capital. And slowly, without treaties or declarations, the world fragments into competing spheres of technological influence, each with its own rules, its own standards, its own version of the future. Chinese AI trains on Chinese data under Chinese rules. European AI develops under GDPR constraints. American AI evolves within US legal frameworks. These systems will increasingly diverge, not just in capabilities, but in values embedded in their design. And that divergence shapes everything from medical diagnostics to loan approvals to criminal justice algorithms. The power to define these systems becomes the power to shape society itself. Now, here's what this looks like in the real world, when theory meets reality. Look at the Russia-Ukraine war. Western sanctions froze Russia's foreign reserves and cut major banks from SWIFT. The expected outcome? Economic collapse within months. The actual outcome? Russia rerouted oil sales through India and China, settled trades in yuan and rupees, and kept its economy functioning, down, but not broken. Not because sanctions failed, but because the global system had already developed redundancy. Parallel payment rails existed, alternative buyers stood ready. The shock absorbers were already in place, not by design, but by quiet preparation over preceding years. This wasn't a victory for Russia. It was a demonstration that unipolar financial power has limits in a world building optionality. And the demonstration sent a message to every nation watching. Never be fully dependent on a single system you don't control. Think of power like water. For 70 years after World War II, global power flowed through a single channel. American-led institutions, dollar dominance, open seas secured by US Navy. That channel worked brilliantly. It created unprecedented prosperity, billions lifted from poverty, wars between great powers avoided, innovation accelerated globally. But channels create dependency, and dependency creates vulnerability for both the controller and the controlled. Now that single channel is developing tributaries, not because anyone declared independence, but because nations and corporations naturally seek redundancy. Why rely on one pipe for your water when you can build a second? Each new tributary seems insignificant alone. A bilateral trade deal between Brazil and China settled in local currencies. A regional payment system in Southeast Asia processing a few $billion monthly. A data center built in Saudi Arabia to comply with local laws. Alone, these moves change little, but cumulatively, they reroute the flow. And when enough water moves through tributaries, the main channel loses its dominance, not through rupture, but through gradual irrelevance. This pattern has appeared before, not identically, but structurally. After Rome fell in the 5th century, power didn't shift to one new empire overnight. It fragmented into regional kingdoms controlling local territories, monastic networks preserving knowledge, merchant guilds managing trade routes. The center didn't collapse. It hollowed out as alternatives emerged at the margins. Grain flowed through new routes, knowledge transferred through new channels, authority redistributed without a single treaty deciding the outcome. The British Empire faced a similar transition in the 20th century. Sterling's dominance didn't end with a crash. It eroded gradually as America built parallel financial infrastructure. The Bretton Woods system in 1944, dollar-denominated oil markets in the 1970s, deep American capital markets attracting global savings. Britain didn't lose a war that ended Sterling's reign. It lost relevance as the world's economic plumbing quietly rerouted through American pipes. By the time London recognized the shift in the 1960s, the foundations had already moved. Power doesn't transfer through declarations, it transfers through infrastructure. When enough actors quietly adopt new pathways until the old center loses critical mass. Today we're witnessing a similar transition, but accelerated by technology. The printing press took 3 centuries to fragment European intellectual authority. The internet is fragmenting global financial and data authority in 3 decades. Speed changes everything. Where past transitions unfolded over generations, this one is happening within a single career span. And that speed creates a dangerous illusion. Because daily life feels normal, your payments clear, your packages arrive, your apps work. You assume the foundations remain stable. But foundations can shift while the house still stands. Venice didn't collapse when Portuguese ships found sea routes around Africa. It ossified. Its merchants still traded. Its gondolas still floated through canals. But the center of gravity had shifted to Lisbon and later Amsterdam. The city remained beautiful, but it was no longer essential. That's the quiet danger facing any dominant power. Not dramatic collapse, but gradual irrelevance as the world builds alternatives that slowly drain your centrality. Where does this lead? Not to a new Cold War with clean blocks, not to American collapse, but to a more fragmented, more complex world. What scholars call multipolarity without order. Multiple centers of power, but no shared rules to manage competition between them. In this world, small nations gain unexpected leverage by playing centers against each other. Vietnam can attract investment from both America and China by remaining strategically ambiguous. Saudi Arabia can deepen ties with Beijing while maintaining its Washington alliance. Brazil can trade soybeans with China while buying weapons from Europe. Corporations become quasi-sovereign actors, choosing which regulatory sphere to operate within based on advantage rather than citizenship. Apple navigates US export controls while maintaining Chinese manufacturing. Tesla builds gigafactories in Berlin to serve Europe while expanding in Shanghai for Asia. Individuals face a new reality. Your digital life may live under different rules depending on which apps you use, which cloud stores your data, which payment system moves your money. Your WhatsApp messages follow one regulatory path. Your WeChat conversations follow another. Your banking app operates under Western finance rules. Your Alipay transactions flow through Chinese rails. This isn't dystopia, it's complexity. And complexity demands new skills, not ideological purity, but contextual intelligence. The ability to navigate multiple systems simultaneously, to understand which rules apply where, to maintain optionality when no single system guarantees safety. What does this mean for you? Not your next investment, not which passport to get. Something deeper. Your understanding of agency in a fragmenting world. For decades, Western citizens assumed a single rule set governed global interaction. One set of laws, one dominant currency, one technological standard. That simplicity is ending, not collapsing, evolving. And with that evolution comes both risk and opportunity. Risk. When systems fragment, friction increases. Cross-border payments slow as they route through multiple clearing systems. Data transfers face new barriers requiring localization. Career paths that assumed global mobility encounter unexpected walls. Work visas harder to obtain. Professional certifications not recognized across blocks. Opportunity. Fragmentation creates space for alternatives. New financial rails may offer better privacy than SWIFT's transparent ledgers. Regional supply chains may create local manufacturing jobs lost to hyperglobalization. Competing data regimes may give you more control over your information than today's surveillance models. The key isn't predicting which system wins. No single system will. The key is maintaining optionality. Diversifying your dependencies so no single shift leaves you stranded. Keep some savings in different forms, not just one currency, but assets with intrinsic value. Build skills valued across multiple economies, not just specialized knowledge tied to one regulatory environment. Maintain relationships spanning different networks, not just professional contacts within your industry's dominant hub. This isn't paranoia. It's prudence in a world losing its single operating system. Most importantly, recognize that power's true shift isn't about who wins. It's about how power itself is redefined. When power flows through infrastructure rather than territory, it becomes harder to see, but easier to access. You don't need an army to influence global flows. You need to build better rails, better protocols, better networks. And that means power is becoming more distributed, not to nations alone, but to corporations that build compelling platforms, to cities that become logistics hubs, to communities that pioneer new models of cooperation. Seeing this changes how you evaluate your own position, not as a passive subject of geopolitical forces, but as a potential node in emerging networks. Because in a fragmenting world, connectivity becomes the ultimate currency. We began with a question: is global power already shifting? The answer isn't in summit photos or military parades. It's in the quiet rerouting of daily transactions, payments settling outside SWIFT, supply chains bypassing traditional hubs, data flowing through new pipes. The shift isn't dramatic, it's mundane. And that's what makes it unstoppable. Not because nations declared independence, but because millions of rational actors, companies optimizing for resilience, banks diversifying settlement options, individuals choosing apps based on convenience, made small decisions that collectively reroute the flow of power. America's advantages remain real. Its innovation capacity unmatched, its institutions resilient, its military formidable. But those advantages now operate within a more contested landscape, not because others caught up militarily, but because the very definition of power expanded beyond what military strength alone controls. Energy transitions matter. Digital infrastructure matters. Supply chain control matters. And in these domains, advantage is fragmenting. This isn't decline, it's diffusion. And diffusion creates both danger and possibility. Danger when competing systems clash without shared rules, when American and Chinese AI systems make incompatible decisions affecting global markets, when payment networks fail to interoperate during crises. Possibility when new actors build alternatives that serve overlooked needs, when African fintech leapfrogs Western banking models, when Southeast Asian nations create neutral trading hubs outside great power competition. This isn't pessimism, it's clarity. And clarity is the first condition of agency. When we see the shift clearly, not as conspiracy, not as inevitability, but as structural evolution, we regain the ability to navigate within it, not with panic, not with nostalgia for a unipolar past, but with eyes open to emerging pathways and the wisdom to build bridges across fragments. In a fragmenting world, connectivity isn't just an advantage, it's your last true form of freedom. The ability to move between systems when others are trapped within one, to access multiple networks when others depend on a single pipe, to maintain optionality when the world loses its center. That capacity to stay connected across divides may be the defining skill of the coming decades. So here's my question for you. Will this fragmentation lead to dangerous competition where systems collide without rules, or to a more resilient global system where multiple centers create redundancy against single points of failure? What can you do to maintain your own optionality in this shifting landscape? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to understand how these silent shifts will reshape your financial future, subscribe now. Because the world is changing, and awareness is the first step toward agency.